But I want to talk about the history a little bit. Long ago, waiting on God was a regular practice that the Quakers engaged in. I know most of us don't know much about the Quakers. I didn't know much about the Quakers until I started researching the topic, waiting on God. But the Quakers, they used to have what they would call waiting meetings. They called it expectant waiting. And here's how it worked. Literally, when the first person walked in the door, that's when worship would immediately begin. There was no talk, there was no moving around, there was no mingling. The focus at that point in the meeting was on, it wasn't on catching up with each other. In fact, the whole idea was to come right in the door and immediately begin to become focused. They were fully expecting to encounter God in those meetings. That was their intent. So they made it a practice to engage in what they called centering down. See, what they were doing, they were preparing themselves to engage with God by turning their complete attention, their complete awareness, and their full focus toward Him. Their goal was to enter into the deepest level of stillness so that they could hear God without any distractions. And they were totally committed and sincere with that. They were serious. In fact, that's why their rooms were so plain. They would meet in totally unadorned rooms. There was no pulpit, nothing, just benches in a room, just benches facing one another. The idea was that they were going to make themselves available to minister to one another under the unction of the Holy Spirit and as the Lord led. They weren't coming in the door with a me mindset. Instead, what they did, they simply tried to be sensitive to any way that God may have wanted to use them to minister to someone else. So here's what that process looked like. As soon as they walked in the door, they would quietly take their seats facing one another. And they faced one another because they understood that they were equals in the sight of God. There were no prearranged sermons, there were no prayers, there were no special readings, there were no announcements. They just expectantly waited on God for His leading on how to proceed in the meeting. There was no pastor. In fact, they called them friends meetings because there was not even a pastor. The concept was to wait for God to bring someone into a deep flow of the Spirit, and then that person would stand up and facilitate the meeting. There was no pre-planning involved. In fact, they literally called them unprogrammed meetings. And the idea was to show up with neither a determination to speak or a determination to remain silent. They were simply there to be obedient to the unction of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit was given full freedom to flow through their meeting.